Hello and welcome to the session on the topics related to Indian polity. So, the topic for the day is the preamble. This in front of you is the text of the preamble to the Constitution of India. Before moving forward, let's try to highlight some of the points that are important uh, if one observes the text of the preamble to the Constitution of India. Because it might be a possibility that in the examination a question may be asked which is totally based on observational skills rather than the analysis. So the preamble begins with the words "We the people of India," and then there are certain words which are capitalized, that is sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and republic. Sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic. Please note between two words like sovereign and socialist there is no comma. Likewise between socialist and secular there is no comma. For that matter, between secular and democratic also, and between democratic and republic also there is no comma. So please make this observation. Secondly, please try to note down the sequence of the words that are coming into picture. First, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and lastly, republic. Because it might be a possibility that in the examination, the examiner may jumble up these words and ask you to rearrange them. So please take a very good look at all these things. So sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic. This is the sequencing of the words. Obviously, we'll be going into the detailing of it presently, but for now, please focus on the sequencing. Then it talks about something called as justice, justice of the nature of social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, and equality of status and of opportunity. It also talks about the promotion of fraternity and thereby assuring dignity of individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. Please look at the words that have been attached with the word justice. Justice is being talked in terms of social, economic, and political. It is political justice, social justice, and economic justice. Likewise, when we look at the word liberty and the things that are written after the word, it is liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Please note economic liberty is not mentioned in the preamble, or you can say with the word liberty, the word economic does not come to picture. Economic as a word comes with justice. So if a question is asked that whether preamble in its text talks about economic liberty or liberty in economic affairs, then the answer would be no. The correct thing would be that economic justice is being talked about. Then it talks about the Constituent Assembly, and it talks about a day, 26th November 1949, and it says that hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. That on 26th November 1949, we, the people of India, hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. So before moving forward, let's try to recap what we have just observed. Firstly, the sequencing of the terms sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and republic. That is the sequencing. And then the other words, the other important words, justice, and with that, social, economic, and political coming into picture, liberty, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship coming into picture, economic liberty, economic liberty is not there. Please take note of it. Sometimes it is asked. Then it talks about equality of status and of opportunity. It talks about fraternity, which assures dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. And finally, it talks about a date, that is 26th November 1949, and it says that on this date, we the people of India, hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this constitution. Moving forward, now, what is the history of preamble? What is the rationale behind the introduction of preamble? What is preamble? What is the purpose of preamble? All these things will become clear if we take into account, if we take a note of the fact that preamble is just like the preface to a book. As the preface to a book which provides the information that what all things the examiner can expect while uh, reading a book, the same purpose is served by the preamble. Now, preamble, the wording, the language of preamble is very much similar. The ideas that are contained in the preamble are very much similar to the objectives resolution, which was moved by our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, uh, when the process of drafting of the Constitution started, it initiated in the Constituent Assembly. So it is the objectives resolution in a way which comes in front of us in the form of preamble. And objectives resolution was all about the fact that what all would be the objectives and aims of the Constituent Assembly, and what all would be the aims and objectives of the Constitution which would be drafted by the Constituent Assembly. Please read the points. Please read the terms of the objectives resolution uh, carefully and try to link these points with the text of the preamble. Now, the first point says that Constituent Assembly declares its firm and solemn resolve to proclaim India as an independent, sovereign republic. Now, these three words are present in the preamble itself. And to draw up for her future governance a constitution. This was the purpose for which Constituent Assembly is coming into picture. Second point talks about the territories, wherein the territories that now comprise British India, the territories that now form the Indian states, and such other parts of India as are outside British India, and the states as well as such other territories as are willing to be constituted into the independent sovereign India shall be a union of them all. It talks about what all would be the territories that would be included within the union of India. Point number three, or aim number three, or objective number three, as mentioned in the objectives resolution, talks about that wherein said territories, whether with their present boundaries or with such other as may be determined by the Constituent Assembly, and thereafter according to the law of the Constitution, shall possess and retain the status of autonomous units, together with residuary powers, and exercise all powers and functions of the government and administration, save and except such powers and functions as would be vested in or assigned to the Union, or are inherent or implied in the Union, or resulting therefrom. It talks about the distribution of powers in a way. What all would be the powers and functions of the constituent units, that is the states, and what all would be the powers and functions of the Union. Point number three is giving a detail about that. Point number four, wherein all powers and authority of the sovereign independent India, its constituent parts and organs of the government are deprived from the people. In the last session, I talked about some basic terms, and one of the basic terms in that was sovereignty. And in that explanation, I said sovereignty means that who is having the ultimate authority. So point number four makes it clear that India is a sovereign land and the source of sovereignty is the people of India. Coming to point number five, wherein shall be guaranteed and secured to all the people of India justice, social, economic, and political equality of status of opportunity and before the law, freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action, subject to the law, and public morality. Now, if you had just noticed that there is a big similarity between the wording of the objectives resolution, points mentioned in the objectives resolution, as well as the preamble that we have just seen. Coming back to point number 6, wherein adequate safeguards shall be provided for minorities, backward and tribal areas, and depressed and other backward classes. This is again that would be ensured through the Constitution. Coming to the next uh, point, that is point number 7, whereby shall be maintained the integrity of the territory of the Republic and its sovereign rights on land, sea, and air according to the justice and law of civilized nations. In a way, it is talking about the international relations and how they would be conducted, and in that context, how the sovereignty and integrity of the country would be would be maintained, would be ensured, and it makes a promise that the sovereign rights on land, sea, and air would be maintained, or you can say would be ensured through law, and that law should be of civilized nations. And point number 8, the last point, the ancient land attains its rightful place and honored place in the world and make its full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and the welfare of the mankind. So these 8 points which are mentioned in the objectives resolution, essentially they they give a hint uh, that what all would be the things that would be found by the reader of the Constitution of India. Any lay person who reads the constitutional text, who reads the articles mentioned in the Constitution of India, and the reader would be able to analyze that essentially the objectives which are mentioned in the objectives resolution, these aims essentially are present in the Constitution of India. And to a large extent, the preamble, we have seen certain points that in the preamble, those points from the objectives resolution, the essence of those points is mentioned. Now let's go into a bit detailing, a bit analysis, and let's try to find out that what all are the purposes of the preamble to the Constitution, and is it the fact that it is the Indian Constitution only which is having a which contains a preamble? To the question that is India the only country which is having a preamble to the Constitution, the answer is that it is not the case. There are various other countries. Some of the countries examples have been provided: America, Canada, Australia, etc. Now, these countries also, in their constitution, they are having a preamble. But at the same time, the constitutions of these countries, the examples that we have taken, they are not that much elaborate in comparison to that of Constitution of India, which is having a much elaborate preamble. Now, what is the purpose of preamble? As I said earlier, that preamble provides a bird's eye view. A preamble provides uh, a glimpse of what all can be expected by the reader if one goes through the constitutional text. But then again, is it the sole aim or is it the only purpose of preamble? Uh, the answer to this question again is in negative. Apart from this purpose of providing a bird's eye view, preamble serves certain other purposes also. Now, what all are the purposes as per the Indian Constitution? What What purposes the preamble to the Indian Constitution serves? So it serves the following purposes. Firstly, it contains the enacting clause which brings the Constitution into force. The preamble to Indian Constitution contains the enacting clause which brings the Constitution into force. Now, what is this enacting clause? If we can go back to the text of the preamble, then the last line of the text of preamble says that in our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. It contains the words enact. So it is acting as, this line is acting as the enacting clause, that we the people of India in our Constituent Assembly on 26 November 1949 adopt and enact and give to ourselves this Constitution. So this is the situation with Indian preamble to Indian Constitution, where it it serves the first purpose of providing the enacting clause. What is the second purpose of preamble? The second purpose of preamble is that it makes a declaration that rights and freedoms are secured for the citizens. We have already seen this when we talked about, if I can again go back to the text of the preamble, when it talked about liberty, equality, and justice. It is in this context the second purpose is served, where it talks about, where the preamble to Indian Constitution talks about the rights and freedoms which are secured for the citizens. Third purpose served by the preamble to Indian Constitution is that it informs about the nature and type of polity which is sought to be established. What would be the nature? What would be the characteristics of Indian polity? The preamble to Indian Constitution provides a hint for that, and that is provided with the inclusion of the term democratic. Try to recall sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and the other word, that is republic. So the Indian polity would be a sovereign system. It would be having socialist characteristics. It would be a secular polity. It would be a democratic polity. It would be having republican character. So all these words, which were mentioned in the very first line itself, after we the people of India, they try to inform, they give the information that the characteristics of Indian polity would be of such type or such nature. And finally, the last purpose of preamble, where it talks about the source of sovereign legitimacy, and it declares that the source of sovereign legitimacy is the people of India. Because if you recall, the last line says that hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution. And the very first word says, we the people of India. Reading them together, we the people of India adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this Constitution on this and this date. It means that the entire power, entire authority, entire sovereignty essentially rests with the people of India. So these are the four characteristics, or four purposes, I'm sorry, which is served by the preamble to Indian Constitution. Now, if you observe that the preamble to Indian Constitution is very much detailed and it gives so much information. It provides so much information. Now, this is the peculiarity of the preamble to Indian Constitution, which is very much elaborate in comparison to the preambles of the constitutions to America, Canada, or Australia. Uh, Now let's go a bit more into uh, what is being said by uh, the individual words that have been included in the preamble, and let's try to relate those words with the things that we have discussed in the previous sessions. Now, the point says that the wording of the preamble shows that the source of validity of and the sanction behind the Constitution is the will of the people. Obviously, it is the people of the country who, through their Constituent Assembly, have created a Constitution, have formed a Constitution, have written a Constitution, and they, through their Constituent Assembly, have adopted and enacted that Constitution. What does it show? That the Constitution is not imposed. It is not imposed by any external authority or agency. Constitution is the handiwork. Constitution is of the making of the Indians. It is the handiwork of the Indians themselves. Constitution has not been imposed on us by some foreign power or foreign authority or foreign agency. It is the Indians who, through their Constituent Assembly, have created and given to themselves the Constitution. So, what does it show? It shows that the people of India constitute a sovereign political body which is holding the ultimate power and who conducts the government of the country through their elected representative. I hope you are able to link this point with the meaning of the term sovereign that we had discussed, sovereignty, sorry, that we have discussed in the previous session. Now, the preamble to the Constitution declares the nature of Indian polity, it makes a declaration about the nature of Indian polity. And it says that Indian polity would be a secular, socialist, sovereign, democratic republic. I have mixed up with the sequence of the words. The correct sequence would be sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. The term sovereign means that India is not under the control or influence of any external agency. It means that India is not under the control of any external agency, and the source of all governmental authority and power, as said earlier, rests in the hand of the people of the country. Meaning thereby, the state can take any legislative action on any subject, as said in the point that the state can take or has the competency to legislate on any subject, but the condition is that the constitutional limits should be respected. So that is the basic meaning of the term sovereignty. Now, what is meant by democratic? The term democratic means, as we have discussed in the previous sessions also, democratic comes from the word democracy. Democracy means that wherein every individual is having an equal chance to become the part and parcel of the decision making process. So that basic philosophy has been incorporated in our constitution, and the preamble highlights that with the inclusion of the term democratic, and it shows that Indian polity follows a parliamentary form of government where the government of the day is responsible and answerable to the elected legislature. And why to the elected legislature? Because elected legislature is constituted by the representatives of the people, and essentially, whenever the legislature is asking questions to the government, in reality, it is the people of the country who are asking the questions to the government. You must have uh, seen this kind of reporting in the newspapers or in the news channels, where the members of the opposition party always use the term that people of the country want to know. देश की जनता जानना चाह रही है. And they are directing the questions to the government. And what they are trying to do over here, they are trying to get the answers, get clarity on issues, and through them, through the legislature, through the representatives of the people of the country will come to know about the totality of the picture. Coming to the next term, that is republic. Republic here is not the Republic TV, but it is simply Republic, and it informs that the head of the state would be an elected functionary. In our passports, the, the cover page contains the words Republic of India. So the word Republic over there means that the head of the state, that is the President of India, would be an elected functionary and would not be a hereditary monarch. We are not living in India. In today's India, contemporary India is not the India of kings and queens. So who is the head of the state? Head of the state would be an elected functionary, would not be coming as a matter of hereditary succession from a particular family. That would not be the case. Next comes the term secular, and we have already seen the meaning of the term secular in the previous session. To go for a quick recap of that, secular or secularism means that there would be no official state religion, and the state would be equidistant from all the religions. That was the basic meaning. Please recall that we had taken the example of Pakistan, where the full name of the country is Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which shows that it is not a secular country, whereas India is. The next term is socialist, and we have already again discussed this in the previous session. Comes from the word socialism. But at the same time, please recall that socialist here in the preamble does not mean doctrinal socialism. It means something different, and what it is, that it is the establishment of an egalitarian social order. We have seen what is the meaning of egalitarian social order in the previous session, but later in this session also this thing would be coming again, so you can you can get the clarity if at all there is some doubt. Moving forward, now the preamble also includes, we have seen the text, it includes the words liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, liberty means what do you mean by liberty? Liberty means a sense of freedom. Liberty means a sense of free will, enjoyment of free will. Equality means that everybody would be treated equally, or would not be discriminated against. And finally, fraternity means an element of universal brotherhood. So these three noble and cherished ideals have been included in the preamble. Now, they are having a very specific relevance, and the relevance of these three words was highlighted by Dr. Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, one of the founding fathers who piloted the Constitution. And in his closing speech in the Constituent Assembly, he explained the significance of the three concepts, that is liberty, equality, and fraternity. What he said, and I quote, that the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. He considered these three concepts, liberty, equality, and fraternity, as the three components or three elements of a trinity. They form a union of the trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. So he was trying to highlight the fact that these three terms or these three concepts should not be treated in isolation, should not be analyzed in isolation. They should be studied, they should be analyzed in a holistic fashion. And why he was saying so? He was saying so for the very simple reason that liberty, if it is practiced, and with it, if equality is not practiced, then what will happen? Ultimately, it will lead to inequality. As he says, that liberty, if liberty is if liberty is divorced from equality, then what will happen? That in the final analysis, inequality will rise. How it will be? How it will be so? Let's take an example. Say there are two individuals, A and B. A wants to open a private enterprise. A wants to open a private enterprise, goes to the authorities, takes the necessary permission, and starts his enterprise. Meaning thereby A has exercised his liberty to operate, to open, to own up a private enterprise. In comparison to this, if B also displays this kind of a will, this kind of a wish, and if B goes to the authorities and says that I also want to open a private enterprise just like A, so please grant me permission. And if the authorities say that permission cannot be granted and therefore could not open the enterprise, what does it lead to? It leads to uh, biasness, it leads to discrimination, and this discrimination is a bad idea. Meaning thereby liberty of one is allowed to prevail over the liberty of another, and that kind of a situation will lead to inequality. And that is why Dr. Ambedkar was saying, he has said that liberty cannot be divorced from equality, and equality cannot be divorced from liberty. Further, he says that nor can liberty and equality be divorced from fraternity. Without equality, liberty would, Dr. Ambedkar further elaborated his analysis and said, without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of few over the many. I hope you are able to understand what he meant by the idea of supremacy of the few over many, and our rudimentary example of A and B both wanting to open a private enterprise, both wanting to exercise their liberty to open up a private enterprise, but that liberty for A is respected by the authorities, but for B it is denied, then what does it lead to? It leads to inequality, which Dr. Ambedkar has defined in a fine set of words where he says supremacy of the few over the many. Furthermore, he says that equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Now, this is just the reverse of what Dr. Ambedkar has said uh, uh, in the previous sentence, that equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. What does it mean? Government says, for example, government says that nobody is allowed to open a private enterprise. The government has come out with a policy. I'm trying to explain this sentence. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. And in this regard, I have taken the example that government has come out with a policy that private firms not allowed. And why the government has come up with the idea that they want a classless society, if I can use that term, classless society. And if private firm comes into picture, then what will happen? It will be creating class distinction. So government says that no class distinction, and therefore the best way forward is that there should be no private property, no private firms allowed. And there are these two individuals, A and B. Now, if these two individuals wanted to open private firm, meaning thereby they wanted to exercise their liberty to own a private firm, but in the name of equality, they have been denied with this right, then what does it lead to? That equality without liberty, equality divorced from liberty, is killing individual initiative, meaning thereby these two individuals, their initiative, their endeavor is not being respected by the government because the government wants to practice equality. So that is the basic idea of what Dr. Ambedkar uh, was having when he explained the concept of liberty, equality, and fraternity to the Constituent Assembly in his last and concluding speech. Now, the sentiment has been echoed by the Supreme Court also, and specifically with respect to fraternity as a concept that has been included in our preamble, the Supreme Court has echoed the sentiment in the very famous case Indira Sahni versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court has emphasized that fraternity, assuring the dignity of individual, has a special relevance in the Indian context because of the social backwardness of certain sections of the community who had in the past been looked down upon. Now, it is this point, it is this idea that has been, you can say, has found its presence in the preamble in the form of fraternity. What is the meaning of fraternity? Essentially, it means universal brotherhood, meaning thereby uh, treating each and every one with respect and dignity. The point being, the point being that in India, for a long time, because of social backwardness and such other things, certain sections of the community, they had been neglected, you can say, or you can say they have been in a way targeted negatively, and this has resulted into widespread disparities. And to do away with those disparities, the notion of fraternity comes into picture, has been incorporated, and the Supreme Court has echoed this sentiment in this very famous case, that is Indira Sahni case. Immediately, you can link this idea. The candidate can link this idea with the fundamental rights. Obviously, we'll be dealing with fundamental rights after some time, but then again, the rudimentary information regarding fundamental rights which you would be having, and it is all about equality, and fraternity is about that universal brotherhood, giving dignity and respect to each and every individual, whether that individual is coming from a backward community or not. But then again, it has to be done. That is the basic idea. Similarly, the DPSPs, the Directive Principles of State Policy. What are DPSPs? They lay down the goals for the government so as to maximize social welfare of the people. Now, this DPSPs and fundamental rights, these two are the chapters that have been included in the Constitution, and they try to realize, they try to make it a reality, the three notions of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So what is being proved over here, what is being shown over here, that preamble gives you a hint of what all to expect in the constitution. Now, if one focuses on the presence of the three words liberty, equality, and fraternity, one can easily expect, one can have that legitimate expectation that there would be in the Constitution of India something about fundamental rights, and there would be something in the Constitution of India about something which is of the nature of directive principles. So please try to link all these ideas with the preamble, and then you will be able to get a complete picture. Now, the preamble also contains the term socialist. The meaning of the term socialist we have already discussed. But it is peculiar to note that the term socialist was not originally mentioned in the constitution. It was not originally present in that draft of the constitution, which came in front of the public on that enacting date, that is 26 November 1949. It was not there. It was added later. The word socialist was added later through the famous 42nd Amendment to the Constitution, the 42nd Amendment Act to the Constitution in 1976. This 42nd Amendment was a very detailed amendment. Sometimes it is also referred to as mini constitution, but that story for some other day. Uh, as of now, please try to remember that the term socialist was added through the 42nd Amendment in 1976. Now, does it mean that India was not having socialist characteristics prior to 1976, and after 1976, after this amendment, only India started to imbibe with the principles of socialism, or you can say socialist characteristics. The answer to that question is in negative. The answer to that question is a straight no. India was having, since independence, uh, uh, the characteristics of a welfare state, a socialist, a socialist state, or you can say a state being run on certain parameters of a socialist state. But at the same time, what was done through this 42nd Amendment, something which was implicit was made explicit. That is the only thing that happened. Something which was implicit was now formalized, was now concretized in the Constitution, in the preamble. But at the same time, please understand that the Constitution, though includes the word socialist, it does not define the term socialist. But at the same time, the Constitution, if you read the terms of the Constitution, if you read the articles of the Constitution, one would be able to conclude that the Constitution does not attach doctrinal socialism as a meaning to the term socialist. Now, what is doctrinal socialism? Please try to recall the last session where we discussed the basic terminology, and in that terminology, the term socialism, basic in that session, the doctrinal socialism as a terminology came into picture, and what was that socialism, which wanted rapid changes in the society, which wanted a classless society, and the things that would be come into picture through to this due to this. So, Constitution of India does not attach that doctrinal socialism with the term socialist, meaning thereby in India you will find private property also, and that is a reality. So what does this term socialism or socialist means in context of Indian Constitution? First and foremost, socialist does not mean total state control over means of production and complete exclusion of private ownership. It does not mean this straightforward. And the meaning of the term socialist in Indian context can be explained through the judgments of the Supreme Court. This becomes important. Now, the Supreme Court, while while analyzing various economic legislations, the Supreme Court has elaborated on the nature of socialism that is prevalent or that is present in the Indian Constitution. Now, in this case, that is Minerva Mills versus Union of India case, a very famous one again, the court has observed that the principal aim of socialism is to eliminate inequality of income and status and standard of life, and to provide a decent standard of life to the working people. What the court has said, that socialist or socialism, which is ingrained in the Constitution of India and which is mentioned in the preamble, it means the concept of social justice and, and an economically egalitarian society. This is the basic meaning of the term socialist that is present as a word in the preamble and as an idea which is prevalent in the entire length and breadth of the Constitution of India. One is the concept of social justice, and the other is economically egalitarian society. Now, if one reads the articles in fundamental rights, and specifically I'm talking about two articles, namely Article 14 and 16. Article 14 is the right to equality, and Article 16 is about uh, uh, equality of opportunity regarding employment under the state. Now, in these two articles, if one focuses on these two articles only, then this idea of social justice and economically egalitarian society becomes clear. And the Supreme Court again has used the concept of social justice and economically egalitarian society, the realization of such a society, and it has said that Article 14 and 16 also mean the implied fundamental right of equal pay for equal work, equal pay for equal work, and compassionate appointment. So if two individuals are doing the same work, they should be paid equally. And compassionate appointment means that if somebody has died while on duty, while on active duty, then one of the family members has to be provided with that appointment, and that is the idea of compassionate appointment. And this is echoed by the Supreme Court in this case, Balbir Kaur versus Steel Authority of India Limited. So ultimately, what we are observing a simple fact that things that are mentioned in the preamble, things that are mentioned by the various words in the preamble, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic, liberty, equality, fraternity, and so on and so forth, all these words are in some way or the other getting elaborated in the successive provisions, in the various provisions of the Constitution of India. Coming to another word, that is secular. We have already seen the meaning of the term secularism, the term secular, when we had discussed in the previous session the basic terminology. Again, please note that secular as a word was not mentioned in the preamble originally. Same case like that of socialist, which was also not there originally. The word secular also was not there. It was added through this 42nd Amendment to the Constitution again in 1976. Again, the very basic question that whether India was secular before 1976, yes or no, answer is still yes. Merely including a particular word in the preamble does not mean that something new has happened. India was secular before 1976 also. India is secular after 1976 also. What has happened, the only thing that has happened is that something which is implicit has been made explicit. Now, what is the meaning of secularism? What is the meaning of secular polity? And we have seen the meaning in the last session that there should be no state religion. That the state is enjoined to treat all religions and religious sects equally. State will not, religion and state will not interfere into one another. That is another meaning of the term secularism. But then again, please understand that although state will not interfere with religious freedom, state will not interfere with religious freedom, but the Constitution does not stop the state, and the Constitution does not allow the religion to adversely affect the secular rights of other citizens. And if somebody does so, then the state will come into picture, state will restrict, state will manage the socio-economic relations between citizens. So on one hand, state will not interfere with religious freedom, but at the same time, it does not allow the religion to adversely affect or negatively affect or negatively damage the secular rights of citizens. And if something of this nature happens, and I'm repeating it again, and if something of this nature happens, then the constitution does not restrict the state. The constitution does not restrict the state to manage the socio-economic relations. A classic example in this regard would be uh, the, 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 the triple talaq issue. What was essentially triple talaq in a nutshell? Husband and wife, husband uttering the words talaq three times in a succession in one sitting, whereas the Muslim personal law in this regard has a very different procedure or method to go for talaq or divorce. Now, what was happening that the relationship between two individuals, the socio-economic relationship between two individuals is getting hampered in some way or the other, where one individual in the name of religious freedom was encroaching upon the rights of another individual. It was on this ground, it is in this ground that the the courts, the Supreme Court has declared triple talaq to be constitutionally invalid. Mind you that Supreme Court has not declared talaq as constitutionally invalid. It has only declared triple talaq as constitutionally invalid. Talaq or divorce, as per the tenets of the Muslim personal law, as per the characteristics, as per the rulings, as per the Muslim personal law is allowed. Only this format, triple talaq, is declared as constitutionally invalid. And after the ruling, the parliament also passed legislation in this regard, which criminalized this kind of a behavior. And this shows that state can come into picture, state can interfere, state can restrict with the such behavior, can stop such behavior. And if the state does so, the constitution would not be stopping the state. These are the things. What I'm trying to say is that please try to link what all is happening in the society with the things that are mentioned in the constitution. In the very first session, I said that you should be able to make linkages. You should be able to link one idea with the things that are happening, that are mentioned in the constitution, and then you should be able to go for a 360-degree analysis. So this is the kind of analysis that would be required. You pick up one word from the preamble, like sovereign, and then try to link it with the things that are happening in the society. For example, China is trying to encroach on our land in Ladakh region. What they are trying to do, they are trying to encroach on our sovereign right. So this kind of linkages would be very much essential for all of you if you go for the analysis in this way. Now let's move on to the next important uh, question, and this question now which has been settled, but for that matter, it has to be discussed again. It has to be discussed that whether preamble is a part of constitution or not. In other words, if I can put this question, that whether the preface of a book is a part of the book or not. Now, the answer to this question, the second question regarding the preface of the book, the answer to this question would be different and would be as per the understanding of different people. But mind you, we are not talking about any book, we are talking about the Constitution of India. But then again, initially, you can say the the general understanding was that preamble is not the part, should not be regarded as a part of the Constitution. And the Supreme Court, in this case, Reberubari Union case, said that preamble is not regarded as the part of the Constitution. Preamble was not considered as the part of the Constitution according to the initial rulings of the Supreme Court. But as you all know, that Supreme Court can revise its own judgments, can revise its own opinion. And in Keshavananda Bharati, another landmark judgment in Indian polity, Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala, the previous opinion, it was revised regarding the preamble being considered part of the Constitution or not. And in this case, the judges showed immense respect towards the preamble. So much so that Justices Selath and Justices Selath and Grover, who were on the bench in this particular case, they had observed that our court has consistently looked to the preamble for guidance and give it a transcendental position while interpreting the Constitution or the other laws. Now, these strong words themselves reflect that what is the nature of preamble, whether it is part of Constitution or not. The answer strictly is that it is a part of the Constitution. It is a part of the Constitution. It is a very important part of the Constitution, but at the same time, it should be noted that preamble is not an operative part of the Constitution. Preamble is not an operative part. Operative part means that that part which gives some effective powers. And when it is said that preamble is not an operative part, it means that it is not giving some effective powers. Preamble is not giving some effective powers to the state. But what is the utility of preamble? As said earlier, providing a bird's eye view to the reader of the Constitution, as well as help in unraveling the minds of the makers of the Constitution. The preamble to the Constitution, helps in unraveling, in revealing what was the mindset of the people who framed the Constitution. Obviously, because of the simple reason that interpretation of Constitution has to be done, and the people who had written the Constitution, they are long gone. So, how to know what they wanted, what was their intent while putting the provisions in the Constitution, and it is through preamble that interpretation becomes easy, and that is the another purpose of the preamble. So, what have we discussed in this presentation? The preamble itself, the utility of the preamble, the purposes of the preamble, the four purposes that we have seen short while back, and then the meaning of the various terms and the linkages of those terms with the things that are happening or that happen in the Indian polity. Then we talked about the amendments and the effect of that amendment, the inclusion of the word socialist and secular. What is the meaning of the term secular? What is the meaning of the term socialist, as highlighted by the Supreme Court? And finally, we came to the question that whether preamble is part of the Indian Constitution or not. And the answer to that question, that yes, it is an important part of the Constitution, which provides a bird's eye view to the reader, as well as it helps in unraveling the minds of the makers of the Constitution. But at the same time, preamble to the Constitution is not an operative part, as it does not grant any effective powers to the state. So this is all about preamble. Uh, Please go through the discussion again and try to analyze the things in a proper context, proper perspective. And with this, I will conclude this session. Uh, See you next time. Thank you very much.